The morning the letter arrived, everything changed. It wasn't snowing yet, but the sky hung low and heavy, the kind of gray that promises trouble. I stood in my driveway staring at the official HOA envelope, my snowplow parked behind me like a loyal dog waiting for work. Inside, one sentence set the tone. My plow was banned from operating in the neighborhood, effective immediately. No warning, no discussion, just a rule. I laughed at first, assuming it was a mistake. By nightfall, that laughter would disappear. I bought the snowplow after last winter's chaos, when ambulances struggled, parents panicked, and cars spun uselessly on untreated roads. I wasn't trying to run a business or show off. I just wanted my neighbors safe. I cleared driveways for free, checked on elderly residents, and made sure the road to the main street stayed open. People waved, kids cheered. The HOA board even thanked me publicly. That was before a new president took over, armed with power, paperwork, and a strange obsession with uniform appearance. The ban cited aesthetics, noise concerns, and unauthorized modification of personal vehicles. I appealed politely. I offered limits, schedules, even offered to plow only during emergencies. The response was cold and final. Any use of the snowplow would result in fines. Heavy fines. I felt angry, yes, but mostly stunned. In a place that prided itself on community, common sense had apparently lost the vote. 3 days later, the snow came hard and fast. Thick flakes erased tire tracks within minutes. Roads vanished. By dawn, the neighborhood was buried. I watched from my window as cars failed to move, parents pacing phones in hand. The HOA sent an email advising residents to wait for municipal services. Those services were already overwhelmed citywide. Then I saw it. The yellow school bus creeping toward the main road, tires spinning, engine whining. It slid, shuddered, and stopped, stuck solid in the middle of the street. Children pressed their faces to the fogged windows. The driver tried everything. Nothing worked. I looked at my plow. I looked at the letter. And I realized this wasn't about revenge. It was about rules colliding with reality, and what happens when stubborn authority meets a storm it can't control. The neighborhood was about to learn that lesson the hard way. As minutes stretched into an hour, tension spread like ice beneath fresh snow. Parents arrived, arguing, pleading, demanding answers the HOA could not give. Phones rang, tempers flared, and every glance drifted back to my driveway. I felt the weight of choice settle in my chest, knowing whatever I did next would define not just the day, but my place in this community forever. Snow kept falling, silent, relentless, daring someone to finally act. I pulled on my boots slowly, deliberately, like each movement needed permission from my own conscience. Outside, the cold bit hard, sharp enough to make every breath feel important. The snow had climbed halfway up the bus tires now, packing itself in light concrete. Parents stood in small clusters, arguing with each other, some shouting into phones, others glaring straight at my house. They all knew. Everyone knew. The irony sat heavy in the air. The HOA president arrived in a spotless SUV, tires spinning uselessly before stopping at an awkward angle. She stepped out carefully, heels sinking into snow, clipboard tucked under her arm as if rules could somehow shovel ice. Her eyes locked onto me instantly. Not with relief, but with warning. The kind that says, "Don't you dare." She reminded me, loudly, that any use of my snowplow would be documented. Fines would follow, penalties, possible legal action. She said this while a bus full of children shivered behind her. I walked closer to the bus. The driver cracked the door, exhaustion etched deep into his face. He'd been driving routes for 15 years, he told me quietly, and had never been stuck this long. Dispatch wasn't answering anymore. Tow trucks were overwhelmed. Salt trucks were nowhere to be seen. The kids were calm for now, but calm never lasts forever when cold and fear settle in. I nodded and stepped back, heart pounding. Back at my driveway, my phone buzzed nonstop. Neighbors texting, some begging, some apologizing, some promising to handle the HOA later. A few stayed silent, watching from windows, unwilling to get involved. I opened the HOA letter again, rereading the words as if they might change. They didn't. The plow sat there, innocent, powerful, forbidden. I remembered last winter's ambulance stuck at the corner, remembered helping a pregnant neighbor reach the hospital. Rules hadn't mattered then. People had. The HOA president followed me, her voice dropping into a threatening calm. If you start that truck, she said, you'll regret it. I asked her one simple question. What was her plan? She didn't answer. She just repeated policy. Policy didn't warm kids. Policy didn't move buses. Policy didn't care that time was slipping. A small hand tapped the bus window. A child waved at me. Not impatient, not scared, just hopeful. That look hit harder than any threat. I felt something settle inside me, a quiet clarity. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't trying to prove a point. I was done waiting for permission to do the obvious thing. I walked back to my truck. Snow crunched under my boots, loud in the sudden silence. The HOA president shouted after me, warning of consequences. I opened the door, climbed in, and placed my hand on the ignition. The engine hadn't turned yet, but the choice already had. Whatever happened next, there was no turning back. I turned the key and the engine answered instantly, defiant. Snow vibrated as the plow lifted, metal awake beneath silence. Parents froze, breaths hanging, while the HOA president stepped backward. I eased forward, tires biting, carving a path nobody authorized. The bus driver watched, stunned, as Snow peeled away slowly. Children cheered softly, mittened hands tapping glass, warmth returning gradually. I cleared space ahead, then behind, then wider lanes carefully. The bus rocked free, coughing smoke, tires finding grip again. Applause broke out, ragged, relieved, echoing against buried houses nearby. I didn't smile, focusing instead on finishing safely for everyone. The HOA president raised her phone, recording, narrating alleged violations. I kept plowing, measured movements, letting results argue louder today. Snow surrendered quickly, transformed from barrier into manageable edges everywhere. The bus pulled forward, hazard lights blinking gratitude openly bright. Parents rushed children home, thanking me with shaking voices everywhere. Only then did the cold seep through my jacket seams. I shut down the truck, silence falling heavy afterward slowly. The HOA president approached, triumphant smile replaced by confusion suddenly. She demanded names, times, evidence, consequences, authority asserted repeatedly loudly. I handed her the cleared road and warmed children safely. She had nothing left but policy, thin and cold today. A neighbor filmed everything, quietly, from a snowy porch nearby. Another offered coffee, steam curling like gratitude in the air. I felt consequences approaching, but regret never joined them today. The storm continued, yet the street breathed again freely now. Somewhere, rules were already bending under shared memory of kindness. I knew fines would come, letters sharp and official later. I also knew neighbors would stand with me together always. The bus disappeared, leaving tracks like proof behind for everyone. Snow fell softer, as if listening now to us all. I went inside, boots soaked, heart strangely calm and steady. My phone buzzed again, messages shifting from fear toward relief. Screenshots spread, videos uploaded, narratives escaping while control quickly online. I realized this was bigger than one plow that day. Authority had met reality, and reality didn't budge at all. I waited for the knock that would follow eventually soon. When it came, it wasn't what I expected at all. The HOA board requested an emergency meeting that night immediately. Neighbors asked me to attend, and I agreed without hesitation. Outside, snowplows finally arrived, laden apologetic city-owned machines. The street stayed open because someone acted earlier with courage. I slept briefly, knowing tomorrow would bring confrontation and consequences. Yet peace lingered, earned by choosing people first over policy. Morning would test everything again, under bright scrutiny from all. I wasn't alone anymore, and that mattered deeply to me. The story had only begun unfolding beyond snow and silence. The emergency meeting was scheduled for 7 that evening, right as darkness swallowed the neighborhood and porch lights glowed against fresh snowbanks. I arrived early, not out of fear, but because I wanted to look every board member in the eye. The community center buzzed with quiet tension. Folding chairs filled fast. Neighbors whispered. Phones were ready. Everyone knew this wasn't just about a snowplow anymore. The HOA board sat at the front table like a jury. The president looked confident again, papers stacked neatly, violation notices already printed. She opened the meeting by reading the bylaws aloud, her voice firm, rehearsed, almost proud. She described my actions as reckless, unauthorized, and dangerous. She said I had undermined the association's authority. Not once did she mention the bus. Not once did she mention the kids. When it was my turn to speak, the room went silent. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue policy. I told a story instead. I described the snowstorm, the stuck cars, the unanswered calls. I described the bus, the children's faces, the cold pressing in minute by minute. I explained that I had two choices that morning: protect myself from fines, or protect my neighbors from harm. I told them which one I could live with. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A parent stood up and confirmed the bus story. Then another. Then the driver himself, still in uniform, spoke calmly about safety protocols and impossible conditions. Someone played the video. The room watched in silence as the plow cleared the road and the bus rolled free. The image spoke louder than anything else. The HOA president interrupted, insisting rules existed for a reason. A resident asked her what the rule was for emergencies. She flipped pages. There wasn't one. Another neighbor asked why community volunteers were punished instead of supported. No answer came. The board shifted uncomfortably. By the time public comments ended, the tone had changed completely. The board called for a recess. When they returned, the fines were withdrawn. Not postponed. Withdrawn. A temporary emergency exception was announced, followed by a vote to revise the snow removal policy entirely. Volunteers would now be registered, insured, and welcomed. Applause filled the room, not loud, but deep and sincere. The HOA president avoided my eyes. I didn't feel victory. I felt relief. Outside, snow still fell, but it no longer felt threatening. It felt manageable, shared, understood. The meeting ended, but something else had begun. A community remembering what it was supposed to be all along. The next morning felt different. From the start, sunlight reflected off untouched snow, turning the street into something almost peaceful. I stepped outside expecting tension, but instead found neighbors waving, shovels already in motion. Someone had organized a group chat overnight. Coffee appeared. Laughter followed. The storm that once divided us had somehow stitched people together. I checked my mailbox cautiously. No fine notices. No warnings. Just a handwritten thank you card from a parent whose child had been on the bus. Inside was a simple line about gratitude and trust. That mattered more than any apology from the board ever could. By mid-morning, the revised HOA notice went out officially. Emergency snow assistance was approved. Volunteers could operate equipment under specific conditions. Liability clauses were added, procedures clarified, common sense restored. It was strangely satisfying to read rules that finally matched reality. I suited up again, this time without secrecy or fear. 2 neighbors joined me with blowers. Another brought salt. We worked methodically, clearing intersections first, then driveways for seniors. Cars moved. Mail trucks returned. Life resumed in small, meaningful ways. The HOA president watched from a distance. When she finally approached, her tone was different. Tired. Measured. She said she hadn't expected things to spiral. She admitted she'd focused so hard on control that she missed the purpose behind it. It wasn't an apology, but it was close enough to count. Later that afternoon, local news called. Someone had sent the video. They wanted a comment. I declined interviews, not wanting attention or labels. This wasn't about rebellion or heroics. It was about responsibility stepping in when systems froze. By evening, the roads were clear. Kids played on snowbanks I'd pushed aside earlier. Parents chatted instead of argued. The neighborhood felt warmer, despite the cold. I parked the truck and shut the garage, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. I knew this peace wouldn't last forever. HOAs forget lessons. Power drifts back toward rigidity. But memory has weight, especially shared memory. The next time snow fell, rules wouldn't be the first thing people reached for. They'd remember the bus, the silence, and the moment someone finally chose to act. That lesson settled quietly, not like a rule, but like instinct. It lived in waves, in glances, in how quickly doors opened afterward. Even disagreements softened, framed by the knowledge of what mattered most. Snow would fall again, storms always do, but the response would be human first. And if authority forgot, the neighborhood now knew it could remember together, acting before fear, before paperwork, before anyone else had to get stuck waiting. That understanding lingered long after winter, shaping conversations, decisions, and courage whenever rules threatened to silence simple, necessary action within the community itself always. Weeks passed, and winter settled into a quieter rhythm, but the story refused to stay buried under fresh snow. The HOA revised documents again, adding language about emergency judgment, neighbor cooperation, and community responsibility. On paper, it looked perfect. In practice, people were still learning how to trust something that had once failed them. That learning happened slowly, in driveways, at mailboxes, during small conversations that mattered more than meetings ever had. I noticed how people looked at rules differently now. They didn't treat them as shields or weapons, but as tools that sometimes needed human hands to guide them. The bus driver stopped by one afternoon with a thermos of coffee and a smile that carried exhaustion and gratitude equally. He said his route felt safer knowing someone nearby wouldn't hesitate again. That comment stayed with me longer than he probably realized. Not everyone approved. A few residents complained quietly, insisting precedent had been set, authority weakened, control lost. They worried about what comes next if one person breaks a rule for the right reason. I understood their fear. Order feels comforting until it becomes blind. I never argued with them. I just listened. Sometimes listening is the only way tension loosens its grip. The HOA president resigned before spring. Officially, it was for personal reasons. Unofficially, everyone knew the weight of that morning had never lifted from her shoulders. A new board formed, less polished, more cautious, more willing to ask questions before sending letters. It wasn't perfect, but it breathed. Snow fell again in late February, heavy and wet. No emails went out. No threats followed. Instead, neighbors checked the group chat, shared updates, coordinated efforts. I plowed intersections. Others shoveled sidewalks. Someone brought soup. The bus never stopped moving that day. Standing there afterward, watching tire tracks fade into slush, I realized something important. This wasn't about defying authority. It was about redefining it. Real authority isn't enforced from clipboards or fine notices. It's earned when people trust you'll choose them over convenience, safety over pride, action over fear. The snowplow remained in my driveway, no longer a symbol of conflict, but of readiness. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a neighbor who learned how fragile systems are, and how strong communities become when someone is willing to act first, even when the rules say don't. Winter eventually loosened its grip, but the lesson stayed. When the next crisis comes, whatever form it takes, people here won't wait as long. They'll remember the bus, the silence, and the sound of an engine starting when it mattered most. The story followed me longer than expected, not through praise, but through questions. People asked what I would do differently, whether I feared consequences, whether I regretted anything. I answered honestly, saying fear existed, but paralysis never helped anyone. That answer spread, quoted online, sometimes twisted, sometimes sincere. A local paper ran a short piece, focusing on rules versus reality. They called me ordinary, which felt accurate and reassuring. Ordinary people, I realized, keep communities alive. Spring approached, melting snowbanks into muddy reminders. The plow stayed mounted, unused, patient. Kids rode bikes where the bus once stalled. The street looked smaller without snow, more human. At a block barbecue, someone joked about banning grills next. Laughter followed, easy and shared. I noticed how humor signaled healing. Later, a new family moved in, asking about winter. Neighbors told the story carefully, emphasizing choice, not conflict. That emphasis mattered. Rules returned to their proper size. They existed, but no longer overshadowed judgment. I learned something personal too. Doing the right thing rarely feels dramatic inside. It feels quiet, heavy, unavoidable. The drama comes later, when others notice. If I had waited, the bus would have been freed eventually. But minutes matter in cold. So does trust. Winter teaches urgency. Communities teach responsibility. Together, they leave marks deeper than tire tracks. I don't know what rule will test us next. I only know waiting for permission isn't always wisdom. Sometimes wisdom starts an engine. And sometimes, that sound reminds everyone what matters. The neighborhood remembered, quietly, together, moving forward. It wasn't perfect, but perfection was never the goal. The goal was movement, warmth, and care when systems slowed. I carried that lesson into work, family, and every decision afterward, measuring policies against people, outcomes against intentions, and courage against comfort daily. Seasons changed, but the memory stayed active, resurfacing whenever snow threatened or authority hardened. We talked sooner, acted faster, and asked better questions. That difference, subtle yet strong, proved the storm worthwhile. I keep the letter in a drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Rules can guide, but they cannot replace conscience. When the next test arrives, I hope we remember the quiet morning, the stuck bus, and the simple courage that chose motion. That memory is enough to keep us human, even when snow returns unexpectedly. It remains ready, waiting, steady, for whenever doing right matters again. And if asked, I will choose people first, every time. Because communities survive by action, not silence. That truth endures beyond any winter rule. We remember together. Time has a way of softening sharp edges, but it also sharpens meaning. By the time summer arrived, the Snowplow story had become part of neighborhood lore, retold casually, like a shared reference point everyone understood. It came up during sidewalk repairs, during debates about parking rules, even during arguments about fence heights. Whenever things grew tense, someone would mention the bus, and the room would recalibrate. Perspective had entered the conversation permanently. I noticed how decision-making changed. Emails from the HOA grew shorter, less threatening, more inquisitive. Instead of declaring, they asked. Instead of enforcing, they explained. The board invited feedback before votes. It wasn't dramatic reform, but it was real. Authority learned to breathe, and in that space, trust quietly grew. One afternoon, I removed the snowplow. Not because I was told to, but because winter had passed. As I unbolted the mount, I felt something close to closure. The truck looked ordinary again, just another vehicle on the street. Yet the meaning hadn't left. Readiness doesn't disappear when tools are stored away. It lives in mindset. A neighbor stopped by as I worked. He said the moment that stuck with him wasn't the plowing itself, but the silence before it. The waiting, the hesitation. He said that silence scared him more than the storm. That comment stayed with me. We talk a lot about action, but rarely about the cost of delay. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't breaking a rule, but refusing to wait when waiting causes harm. The school sent a letter at the end of the year, not naming anyone, but thanking the community for prioritizing safety during extreme weather. It mentioned cooperation, responsibility, and collective care. Parents shared it proudly. Kids didn't know the politics behind it. They only knew they got home safely. That was enough. I realized then that the true impact of that morning wasn't conflict, or policy change, or even community bonding. It was proof. Proof that individuals still matter inside systems. Proof that one decision can ripple outward, reshaping how people respond next time. Proof that doing the obvious right thing can quietly realign an entire neighborhood. Life moved on. New issues arose. New disagreements tested patience. But beneath them all was a shared memory, a quiet understanding that when things freeze up, someone must move first. And next time, it might not be me. That's how communities should work. Not heroes. Just people willing to act when it counts. Years later, long after the snowplow was sold and the truck replaced, the story still surfaced in unexpected moments. It came up when a power outage darkened the street and neighbors checked on one another without waiting for instructions. It surfaced when a fallen tree blocked the road and no one argued about permits before grabbing saws. The lesson had outlived the storm that taught it. I sometimes think about how close everything came to going the other way. How easily fear of fines, lawsuits, or embarrassment could have kept me inside that morning. How simple it would have been to say, "Not my problem," and let systems grind slowly forward. Nothing heroic would have happened. Nothing terrible either. Just cold kids, wasted hours, and a quiet erosion of trust no one could quite name. What stayed with me most wasn't the applause, the meeting, or the policy changes. It was the look on people's faces when movement finally replaced waiting. Relief doesn't announce itself loudly. It settles in, warm and steady, reminding everyone what progress feels like. That feeling became a reference point, something the neighborhood reached for whenever decisions felt stuck. I learned that authority isn't weakened by compassion. It's strengthened by it. Rules matter, but they exist to serve people, not the other way around. When rules lose that purpose, someone has to remind them. Not angrily, not dramatically, just clearly, through action. The bus never got stuck again on that street. Neither did ambulances, delivery trucks, or parents trying to get to work. That wasn't because of better bylaws alone, but because hesitation lost its grip. People trusted each other a little more. They asked, "What's needed?" before asking, "Is it allowed?" I don't tell this story to encourage rule breaking. I tell it to encourage thinking. To remind people that responsibility doesn't end where policy begins. Sometimes it starts there. Sometimes it starts in a driveway, staring at a choice no one else wants to make. Every community faces moments like that, disguised as inconvenience or conflict. Most pass quietly, unnoticed. But once in a while, one becomes a turning point. Not because someone was special, but because someone moved. If there's one thing I hope sticks, it's this: when people matter, action matters. Waiting has consequences. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just turns a key, pushes forward, and clears a path so others can keep going. That morning taught us more than how to handle snow. It taught us how to show up for each other when it counts. And that lesson, unlike winter, never really melts away.